This week we talk about finding a supplier and making sure you have the right factory, where to find the factory, and make sure that you don't get screwed over by your factory. Welcome back to the Inner China Show. This week I'm in beautiful Napa Lake in Shangri-La, China. We have Rico Ngoma on the show this week, and he is the founder of SourceFind Asia, a member of InterChina, and now a founder of InterChina, a partner in InterChina. And he has a lot of wisdom to share about finding the right factory in China, so I'm excited to get into it with him. Let's do it. So Rico, for those people that are looking to find a factory, find a supplier for the first time, where do they begin? What's that kind of basic first step for those people?
Well, there's three methods, I would say. The most obvious one is online, right? So you want to go to Alibaba, Global Sources. Most people are aware of Alibaba. Global Sources is the equivalent, except it's an older platform and they're actually more selective about the suppliers that they allow on there. So there's limited options compared to Alibaba, but it's a great resource. If you don't know what those are, they're essentially directories for factories. So it's Google, but specified towards suppliers. The most common method and probably the best method is word of mouth. So if you're able to tap into a good network, for example, like the InterChina network, then you want to talk to other people who have done it before, who have sourced these factories. That's in China, especially if you have people that are Chinese introducing you to factories. Then mianzi comes into play, and mianzi is to lose face. So if I'm a Chinese person, I introduce you to a supplier, I want to make sure that supplier is reliable because it's going to reflect badly on me. And from a cultural standpoint, that's pretty important. As the third option as well would be getting a sourcing company. If you don't have any experience and you don't want to come to China and you don't want to learn through trial and error, being on the ground, but you have money, I would say get a sourcing company. It's just going to make your life a little bit easier. And then you can focus on building your business, right? Why would you want to learn how to run a completely separate aspect of your business when there are people who are specialists in that arena? When it comes to finding a sourcing company as well, same thing. There's word of mouth. If you're on Facebook, there's a ton of Facebook groups where if you're an FBA seller, you can join one of those groups, ask for recommendations. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for just sourcing tips and stuff, there are groups like that. You can Google search. Look for podcasts, like people found my company through our podcast. So online is a pretty good method for finding sourcing companies as well.
Yeah, so three solid options for finding a sourcing company. But okay, so let's say you're out there, you're looking, you're on Alibaba, you're on Global Sources, you hired a sourcing agent. How do you know that you found a good fit in the factory, and how do you know what to look for in that factory?
How do you know that you found a good fit for your factory? So identifying a good factory starts with knowing the ins and outs of your product. You are the buyer, right? So it's your responsibility to do your research, do as much research as possible, know what the raw materials are, what is the process of making this product, the dimensions, prior to contacting suppliers. So the disadvantages and advantages of using certain raw materials. So like when you contact those factories, straight off the bat, you're going to be asking the right questions, and you'll be able to immediately know based on their responses whether this supplier is a good fit for you. When you have these details down, you'll be able to communicate your needs more clearly. You'll be asking the right questions, like I said, and the factory also respect you for it.
So if you're out there, you're finding suppliers, and what about bad suppliers? How do you weed out those bad suppliers? How do you identify those bad suppliers?
So, some quick tips are like with anything, if you send out a very detailed email on Alibaba or directly to the supplier, and you have all of your questions bullet pointed out very clear, and then you get a generic response 2 days later, which seems like an auto response, you don't want to go with that supplier. There are professional suppliers out there, and you can find people. Like we've emailed, let's say, 10 factories in a day, and then we'll get a response within 6 hours, and it's very clear, and they're replying to every single question that we asked. And the ones that come up with the generic responses, we just don't pay attention to. this also goes back to knowing your product, right? If you ask certain questions about the production process, you'll be able to figure out whether this factory is capable of producing the order quantity you need, producing the product to the standards that you're requesting, and if they're in your price range. If you're doing everything online, so let's say you're in North America and you're trying to source products from there, you might want to put more restrictions in place and use the available tools to protect yourself. So, for example, there's Alibaba Trade Assurance, which basically is kind of insurance. If you pay a supplier through Alibaba and some issue comes up during production or at the end of production, and you can't reach some sort of amicable agreement with the supplier, you log a complaint with Alibaba, show them your invoice, and then they should refund you. Keep in mind as well with Alibaba Trade Insurance, there's a limit depending on your supplier's reputation. If you're already on the ground in China, the best moves are getting a local to communicate with suppliers on your behalf. I know a couple people who have sourced products who were teaching English and just starting and got their students to help them, communicate with the suppliers. You're probably going to get preferential pricing. You can tell if the factory is actually professional versus there being some sort of language barrier, because I know a lot of times people will be, well, maybe it's because, they don't speak English, but if you have a local speaking Cantonese or Mandarin communicating your needs, then you know that this factory is just not a professional factory because there's no reason for them not to understand what your requirements are.
Yeah.
And then the last part, on top of that, being in China, you can physically visit the factories and weed out whether they're a bad supplier.
Yeah, physically visiting was invaluable for me to know. And actually, one of the things I would add is when you're actually at the factory, check out the brands that they represent. They might take you to a showroom and go check out the stuff that they have in their showroom. And then when you make little notes of it, when you go home, check out on your computer what those brands are, and even if they're real or not, because a lot of times there's a bunch of fake Chinese brands in there. So
yeah.
But you mentioned MOQ, minimum order quantity, and price, and so I wanted to get into that a little bit. How do you understand if the factory can meet your needs when it comes to MOQ and price, and kind of what you're looking for ahead of time? You have an idea of what you're looking for, you want to go and communicate that to them. How do you communicate that effectively to your factory?
So in terms of how to communicate your MOQ or price point, I don't think there's any special strategy. I'm sure there'll be other people out there who say, yeah, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I prefer to just tell the factories up front. Like if the factory is willing to work with us, then they'll adjust their MOQ or adjust their per unit cost. Now, in terms of price specifically, I don't like to disclose my customer's price point. In fact, sometimes I don't even ask my customer's price point. I want to just find the best factories possible until much further down the line, So in terms of MOQ dictates the price. It's the most important thing, because if you're a customer and you're looking for a factory and you find a factory and the MOQ is 5,000 units at $2 per unit and your price range is $2, if you negotiate them down to 1,000 units, they're gonna maybe even double the price. Right, so straight off the bat, if the MOQ is too high, if the price is already somewhat close to your budget, then you might want to move on or maybe increase your budget, right? With regards to, I think we talked about sourcing companies as well. If you're using a sourcing agent and you can afford them to choose the right one, the process would be easier, would be faster, ensuring that your product is made on time, and also communicating those things, like the fact that this is a sourcing company, they might have relationships in the country and they might be able to find suppliers or negotiate prices with those suppliers. Like I have examples of situations where I've been able to get better price points because I have multiple customers ordering products from the same supplier.
Okay, yeah. So we kind of already touched on a little bit about factory visits, and I gave a tip about checking out the showroom. But what are some other essentials of a factory visit? If you're going to go yourself,
if you're physically going yourself, it depends on what step you're in the process, and what your goal is. When I visit factories for the first time, I've already put them through a thorough vetting process. So I like to come ready with a sales agreement. I like to so that we can just sit down and go through those details. I aim to verify certain details, like you mentioned before, like if they're talking about certain brands that they work with, this happens very often. You contact a supplier on Alibaba and they'll say, yeah, well, we make products for Disney and, we make products for Marvel. And it's like, okay, cool. Then when I go there, I want to see examples of those products, right? Can you show me an invoice that, a recent invoice from Disney? Like, can you give me some sort of proof that you actually work with these brands? Also, I want to verify other aspects of their business. Like, is the name of the building, the name of the factory, the same as the bank account that they gave you? If not, then why? It's not uncommon that a Chinese mainland company will register in Hong Kong and have a variation of the name. That's not uncommon. But at the same time, there's situations where your factory is not even linked to the company that you're dealing with from a legal standpoint. They just have some sort of agreement that, hey, when I get a customer, you guys will manufacture the product and we'll share the profits. If that's the case, again, I want to know, I want them to be transparent, and I want to put that in the sales agreement. I inspect a factory to see the level of organization, professionalism. Is it just a few offices in one large room with multiple departments packed into this giant place? Like, are we doing assembly, painting, and packaging in one space? Like, that's not necessarily the most professional environment. You might be able to get better price points within a factory like that, but there's also going to be a higher risk involved in terms of the quality aspect. What you're looking for is a building where there's maybe 2-3 stories, maybe even 4 stories. One floor is purely offices. There's another floor for painting. There's another floor for assembly. There's another floor for packaging. There's another room for quality checks. That's the kind of professional factory you want to be dealing with. As well, you want to look at the assembly line. When you look at the assembly line, normally a really professional factory will have, like, it's like a long table, and then there's seats, and there should be like lighting on the top, and there's instructions on how to manufacture this product that they're making. So look at what they're making and then look at the instructions. Are they up to date? Are they making a completely different product from the instructions? Then you know that this factory's processes are not rigorous. They don't follow those standards, right? Okay. And then do they have safety procedures as well? So you want to look at those kind of things.
Okay, so let's say we've done our due diligence, we've vetted factories, and now it comes time to sign a contract. And first we start with samples, and then we go into making kind of that larger order. Can you tell us the process of that sample contract and then going forward to the kind of mass order contract?
So I think me and you spoke about this before. Like, I don't make a contract for samples. If we're going to do a sample run, I like to include that just in the sales agreement itself. Right. So if you're getting initial samples prior to production, just to verify that this is going to be the perfect sample, I don't think there needs to be a contract for that. Again, if you're getting samples just to vet a couple of different factories and go with the best one, I don't think there needs to be a contract for that. Generally, the way I do it, like I said, is we will have negotiated all these things. They would have probably sent us samples beforehand, and then now we have what's called the perfect sample. Sometimes they'll produce the perfect sample like 5 days into mass production. If they have them already in-house, like if you're doing an OEM product, then they might be able to just give you a perfect sample. You sign off on that sample, and this is the production standard. So that's in terms of samples, that's how I deal with contracts.
Okay, yeah, and for an alternative perspective, my item was a watch. It was a little more high dollar. The actual cost of the watch was quite high, and so they were charging me a significant amount to make samples, and I was getting quite a few samples made. So for me, when I saw the price tag of the sample, I said, okay, I want to hedge my risk here and create a contract for this sample order as well. And so that's why I ended up creating a contract for the sample. And then once the samples met my specifications, then we move forward just like you were talking about. So I think there's a kind of different ways that you can approach the sample kind of contract, if you will.
It comes down to the type of product that you're making. So like, I'll give you another example. We have one of the largest orders that we've dealt with in the past year was a toy, and it's an original design. It's an ODM product. So in that situation, they have to create an entire mold, which is like a steel casing that has the shape of the toy, and that's they inject plastic into it. Um, they have to create this whole thing, so we have to make samples for that, and of course the samples are expensive, but at that stage you're already paying them to make a mold because they'll only be able to make a 3D sample beforehand. So that even that 3D sample, as much as it might look like the toy that you're trying to make, it doesn't accurately reflect how it's going to look because they have to make samples from the mold. So regardless, you're paying for the mold, which could be $5,000 to $8,000, and you're already invested in the factory. So that's why I said that you sign a contract already and you've already signed the sales agreement, and they make the mold, and then now you have the samples that you can sign off on.
Yep. Okay, so let's say we're moving forward, making a decision, signing a contract. What does that look like?
I mentioned signing a sales agreement with you when you visit the factories, right? Most of the time, I actually don't end up signing the sales agreement when I visit the factories. There's always some small details that need to be changed, and sometimes there's things that I feel like I can sign off on based on my experience. But then other times they need to go back and talk to their boss about, let's say, some quality standard that I might have in the agreement. Maybe the late fee. The late fee is always a big deal with the factories. And then there's some things that I need to go talk to my clients about and see if they're comfortable with changing those in the sales agreement. So generally, you should come up with the sales terms. The per unit cost, they give it to you, of course. You can negotiate that probably when you're at that stage. Shipping terms, be clear about that. So the most common ones are ex-works, FOB. Payment terms should be 30 to 50% upfront, never more than 50. Don't let any factory lie to you about that. Most of the time it's 30 anyways. Yeah. And then, final payment after a third-party quality control inspection. So, and you need to decide what the acceptable quality level is for you. So there's a standard called the AQL standard. There's level 1, level 2, level 3. I won't go too deeply into it because I'm sure you're going to do a QC episode. So you want to decide in that which level you're going to use, and then what is a critical, major, and minor defect for you. Those are things that need to be listed in the contract. You need to sit down and go through those details very clearly with the factory, make sure they understand it, make sure they sign off on it. Another pro tip I actually learned fairly recently is if you do have a chance to sit down with the factory boss, again, mienza, losing face, right? So you want them to sign off on certain details, some of the most important details of the contract. If the boss is there and then his sales manager is there or his production manager is there, you get the boss to agree to this sales point, this acceptable quality level, this delivery time. He now has to keep that, he has to hit that deadline because he has to save face in front of his employees. You know? So that's a little cultural pro tip.
So Rico, word on the street is you've got a contract template you can hook us up with.
Yeah, I have a contract template. It's up on Google Drive. It's in the cloud, bro. So anybody, it's in the cloud. Everything's in the cloud. Yeah. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, then I can send it to them for sure.
Cool. So last thing, other possible things to look out for in this whole process?
This is going to sound strange, but my business partner, China Mike, I'm sure you guys might have seen his video before that I think he did with Tim. He told me on my first factory visit, he's like, you have to trust your gut feelings, right? Like when it comes to dealing with factories, if there's something off about the communication or you feel like they're hiding something from you, don't make excuses. Don't make excuses for them. I think because inherently we are good people and we're coming from a culture where we expect every company to honor their contracts and reputation is such a big thing with businesses in the West, we just assume, I think he replied late because maybe he's sick. Like we always come up with some excuses, So if you just feel something's off, like if they're not answering your questions at the factory or they always take 3 days to reply via email, like, just find another supplier, man. Like there are so many other suppliers out there. We've seen too many people keep digging themselves deeper and deeper into a hole with certain suppliers because they just choose to ignore clear signs in front of them. So yeah, that's the last piece of advice I could give.
Go with the gut. That's good. So I'm about to shut down the feed. Any last words?
Actually, one thing I wanted to say is like, I remember 2 years ago in the summer 2014 being in the frat house in Toronto, Sigma Chi, shout out, and watching, the elevator life at the time, now the Inter China show, on YouTube with one of my buddies, Ravi, and just like being like, yo, I'm looking at Tim and Nick, I want to go and do what these guys are doing. So it's kind of insane to actually be on the show right now, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty grateful
And now
to my
you're a
situation. I think I
partner
made the right,
in
and now I'm a
Indochina.
partner. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I made the right decision moving to China.
Yeah. It's definitely the
Yeah.
right decision. It can be tough at times, but it's definitely worth it. So,
Yeah, it definitely wasn't easy, but I think if you have the perseverance, you can
all right. Thanks, Rico.
make it through. Sure, man. Peace.